Well, Ted Wade from The Athletic joins us right now here on Fox 32 Chicago, our little podcast edition. Ted, we are less than a week out, obviously, from the NFL Combine in Indy. You're hitting the road. You're going to be there for that. But before we get into some players that you're going to be keeping your eyes on, and of course the Bears roster needs and all that jazz, let's talk about Maxx Crosby and the whole saga that's happening right now in Las Vegas. First off, Crosby and Caleb Williams did a podcast that was released yesterday. It was about an hour long, and you can tell just watching the podcast, there's a mutual level of respect and just also a friendship with the two. Obviously, the past season, one of the, I feel like, glaring issues with this team is, of course, the defensive side of the ball, but especially up front. They need some help. You and I have talked about it time and time again. So tell me this. Do you think Maxx Crosby would be a fit, first off, on this Bears defensive line?
Yeah, I mean, I think Crosby would be a fit on a lot of different teams, but I think for the Bears who really need a number one rusher, and really need to upgrade the pass rush, I think it really makes sense as far as timing. And this is a team that, as far as timeline, they are further ahead than most people would expect them to be. Getting that far in the playoffs in Ben Johnson's first year, this is a team that's ready to compete, and I think that's intriguing for Maxx Crosby to get to a team that's ready to compete, and for a team at this stage, getting a player like Maxx Crosby could be the difference in making the Super Bowl possibly. So I just think it makes a lot of sense from a personnel and timing aspect.
Do you think the Bears are a player away from like someone like Maxx Crosby from actually being serious contenders and making it deep in the playoffs and of course for the Super Bowl?
I think Maxx Crosby will make a huge difference, but I do think that they have more work to do, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I think they made some progress last year on the defensive side of the ball, but I don't think you could just rest on your laurels if you do attain a player like Maxx Crosby. It does make everything a little bit better because Montez Sweat then goes to the number two rusher type of role. I think he could feast in that type of role. But I do think they need some work among the defensive line, adding some beef in a defensive tackle room. There's rumors that they might release Terrell Edmonds, so you might need some linebacker help as well. And of course, you need more secondary depth.
Apparently, the word on the street is the Raiders want two first round picks for Maxx Crosby. And I've gotten the chance to speak to some people. Some think that this is going to cost more than the Micah Parsons deal when he went from Dallas to Green Bay. I believe they gave up two first round picks for him as well as Kenny Clark. I mean, when you look at Maxx Crosby's age right now, I believe he's 28, 29. Last season, 10 sacks, and obviously was upset with the Raiders, the front office, of course, for holding him out there in those last two games, despite even having a serious knee injury. I was in Las Vegas for 2.5 years. You have also been covering the Raiders. Maxx Crosby is a player that is going to always want to play. He has a relentless motor, just a relentless engine to him. What have you learned so far about Crosby in your time covering him?
Yeah, like you mentioned, he's relentless. I think part of the reason why he can get a package that is equal to or more than Micah Parsons, even though he's older, and maybe you could say Micah Parsons is the better player. I mean, he is like a all-time type of freak athlete, but I think with Maxx Crosby, you get that leadership and you get that example of a player that you want other players to emulate, like Jermaine Illuminor, the offensive tackle who was a Raider, that became a Giant, said that he didn't really know what work ethic was until he saw Maxx Crosby work, and it really changed his perspective on things. And I think a lot that affects a lot of players too. So I think his work ethic is what really sets him apart. And as far as on the field, he's just like a freaky, flexible type of player that like gets into positions that you don't see normal defensive ends are able to get into. He's very instinctual. Like he'll be able to get a bunch of tackle for losses against the run just based on film study and jumping gaps that you wouldn't normally see a defensive end jump into. So I think instincts, he's one of the best run defenders on the edge, and just a leadership and work ethic perspective, those things make him special.
The Bears, if you had these two options, okay, go get a player like Maxx Crosby, go get him, give up maybe two first round picks as well as DJ Moore, because Crosby's his contract is tradable, or sign Trey Hendrickson to this team and maybe at a lesser deal. Which one would you pick? What is the smart choice here for the Bears?
Well, I think DJ Moore is a depreciating. I think it's going to be hard to trade that contract. I don't think other teams will look at DJ Moore and say, "Ooh, like add that into the package," because he's a very limited receiver getting paid a lot of money. So it's almost a contract that you have to trade assets away in order to trade that contract away, like like we've seen some teams do with certain quarterback contracts. But going back to your question, I think um, would I rather give a haul away for Maxx Crosby or sign Trey Hendrickson in free agency? Um, I th it depends. I think Trey Hendrickson has a year or two of good football on him. I think he is older. I don't know if his game will age that well because I think if he loses any ounce of athleticism, you'll start seeing a big decline from him because he's not naturally a super athletic defensive end. But obviously, he does fit into what Dennis Allen wants to do because he played for Dennis Allen, and we talked about Dennis Allen liking those power rushers. Um, so, I would think if you are able to get Trey Hendrickson, I would rather do that rather than trade away two first round picks and another valuable pick for Maxx Crosby. I think Maxx Crosby is clearly better, but I think the difference between the two and the capital you would have to give up, I would rather get Trey Hendrickson, but I doubt that the Bengals are just going to let Trey Hendrickson go. I think they're likely going to franchise tag him and maybe do a sign and trade or something like that.
The Bears are not able to get a Maxx Crosby, a Trey Hendrickson. Who are some other players you can give us that you think they should also maybe have on their radar too to help up front here? Because as we all saw last year, it was a struggle, especially defensively when you take away the takeaways for this team, the numbers from the pass defense, rush defense, especially when it came to stopping the run. I mean, this team really struggled.
Yeah, I don't think there are many defensive ends in free agency that are going to really attract you or change the whole outlook of the Bears pass rush. But I'm saying his name wrong, but Ode Ofe from the Ravens, who got traded to the Chargers. He's not a number one rusher, but I think he's a really good defensive end that could add to your room. I thought he improved his pass rush last year. Um, Old friend Khalil Mack, he's going to be a free agent as well. Obviously, he's nowhere near the player that he used to be, but he still offers something in run defense and a little bit of juice off the edge. And then you could look into the draft and get and possibly draft a pass rusher. This is not the strongest year for if you're looking for a defensive end, but there are some good names out there that you could draft. At towards the bottom of the draft, you might be looking at guys that are have a little bit of a risky profile, like Akeem Mesidor from Miami. He's a little bit up there in age and has a bit of an injury history, but his tape is really good. And if he's able to stay in the field, he looks like he has the ability to develop into a really good pass rusher.
That leads me to ask this next question. Do you think the Bears are maybe actually better off building through the draft here versus going out and having, if you want to realistically get Maxx Crosby, you got to give up, you know, a really nice prize, nice package for him because the Raiders are not going to give him up unless they get something in return that they feel like is valuable and fair. And also with Trey Hendrickson too, are they better off maybe building through the draft here?
I think this is a deeper draft for defensive tackles, and I think defensive end is a big need. So I would say if you can get Maxx Crosby or Trey Hendrickson, you should be aggressive in trying to get them, and then you could add a defensive tackle, in the second or third round of this draft, and if you hit on that pick, then you're really cooking with fire. But I think in this draft, it's going to be hard to find a really great defensive end. I don't think this is a great draft for ends, but it's a strong draft for defensive tackles. I think it's a deep draft for defensive tackles, and you could find one later in the draft. So I think ideally, in a perfect world, you make a trade for one of those defensive ends we talked about, and you get a defensive tackle, and then all of a sudden your defensive line looks a lot different.
Before we dive a little bit deeper into NFL Combine coverage, especially because you are going to be there next week in person, one last question about Maxx Crosby and Trey Hendrickson. Elaborate to me more as to why you think Trey Hendrickson would be a better fit here on this Bears D line, given both players obviously would make a difference for this team, but it sounds like you're leaning way more in the direction in favoring Trey Hendrickson on this fit.
Yeah, I mean, in the scenario that Trey Hendrickson becomes a free agent and you don't have to give up two first round picks to get him, I think that would be ideal. But I think what's likely going to happen is the Bengals are going to franchise tag him and you have to trade for him anyways. So in that scenario, depending on draft compensation, I would probably lean on just go all out and get Maxx Crosby. But if he's a free agent, you could get him for nothing. Then, as far as draft capital, I would definitely lean on Hendrickson in that situation.
How worried should teams be when you look at Max Crosby's injury history? Eight surgeries in seven seasons, and that's large in part because, as I mentioned earlier, this is a guy he refuses to sit out. I mean, it's the reason why that relationship with the Raiders got even more strained when they were like, no, like we will not let you play in those last two games. How concerned though should teams be when they see that? I mean, eight surgeries in seven seasons, I hear that and I'm like, that's he again, a relentless guy, relentless motor is gonna want to play and of course make his teammates better, but that's a little concerning to me.
Yeah, it is for sure. But I will say the injuries aren't like a devastating injury. These are injuries that he's played through. I don't. A lot of players probably wouldn't have played through them. But it is concerning. But I think it is a conversation that if you do trade for him, that you have to cut his snap count down. Like what he's doing right now is insane. Like I don't think there's any other ends in the league that are playing the amount of snaps that he's playing. So that's definitely an issue. I mean, it's something that you respect and appreciate that he wants to be out there. But cutting down, especially as he's getting towards his 30s, is something that you do have to talk to him about. And I think on the brighter side, even though he has suffered these injuries, he's played through them. So, he's on the field. And he probably could have been on the field the last two games for the Raiders, but it was probably a better idea for him to sit.
Totally. Well, by the way, they got the number one pick, so they're playing. You can argue that it certainly worked there. Okay,
Mhm.
let's talk about the combine now in Indy. Give me some guys that you are going to be keeping your eyes on. Obviously, we've talked about how the Bears up front on the D line they need help, but especially an upgrade in the interior, the D tackle. So, give me some guys that you're keeping your eyes on next week.
Yeah, I think Caleb Banks from Florida, he's 6'6", 334 pounds. He missed most of the 2025 season because of injuries. But I'm curious to see how his medical is going to be. I think he could be a guy that ends up shooting up draft boards if he has a clean bill of health and he runs well. He looks like on film, he looks like a guy that's going to test pretty well. But if teams are a little bit weary, that's a guy that could end up falling into the range of where the Bears are drafting. And if he's in that range, do you want to take a chance on a guy with a bit of injury history with really high upside, or do you want to go with a player that's a little bit more safe, but it could also fit your style? A guy like Caden McDonald from Ohio State, who's also a defensive tackle, 6'3", 330 pounds. He's a run stuffer, a guy with burst. Not quite the upside of Caleb Banks, but also a really good player that will end up in that range where the Bears are going to be drafting.
Overall, how would you characterize this draft class? Because you mentioned earlier, it's not a good draft class when it comes to DNs.
Yeah, I think overall it's the high end talent is probably lacking for most draft class when you compare that to other draft classes. And it's not super deep in all positions, but I think there are some stronger position groups like defensive tackle, like we mentioned, wide receiver. It seems like we always have good, strong, deep wide receiver classes. There's not like a top end wide receiver, but I think there are some really interesting wide receivers you get through rounds 1 and 3. It's a very bad class if you're looking for a quarterback or a running back, that's for sure. There's only one guy that is probably going to get a first round grade. There might be some guys who get pushed up there, but the Raiders will probably get a lot of interest for that first round pick from teams that need a quarterback.
When you look at the interior of the defensive line for the Bears last season, players like an Andrew Billings, Dio Dangwell, obviously he got hurt there this year, but Grady Jarrett as well. What were, in a sense, lack of a better way to put it right now, what were the biggest issues with those guys, especially when it came to stopping the run?
Yeah, I mean, when I watched them, it's just like these guys were getting pushed around so easily. A lot of yeah, it's just you need a guy that could hold up in run defense, hold their gap up, be able to shoot gaps, and you just did not see a lot of disruption. And when they aren't able to get into a gap with quickness, they got pushed around. So you definitely just need a lot more strength at that position.
Overall, final few questions for you. Give me maybe a storyline that you're going to be monitoring here at the combine, because we all know obviously the combine is a huge networking event as well. But when it comes to finding out some more info about the players, we always find funny little tidbits. But what are some storylines that you'll be monitoring too?
Yeah, I think obviously the Maxx Crosby storyline is going to be huge. I heard that the Bengals are going to be kind of monitoring interests around Trey Hendrickson at the combine. So it wouldn't be surprising to kind of hear or see his trade market kind of materialize there. But other than that, I mean, it's just a good time to catch up with people that you talk to online all throughout the week. There isn't really a storyline that I'm really looking at or interested in. I think the more you talk to people, the more you kind of find out these things and see what the storylines are going to be.
Well, Ted, we will catch up with you after the combine because I know after that you will have plenty of stories to share as well. Of course, can give us the latest on what you're hearing about Trey Hendrickson and Maxx Crosby too. Thanks for the time.
Thanks for having me on.